Welcome to another session of Stelmo's Rants and Raves. I'm Stelmo. Let's just jump right in there. Um, so we have basically a unilateral ceasefire now in Iran where apparently our military leaders have informed the president that they've run out of targets. And I don't know, uh, are these incompetent military officers, or perhaps are they correct? I'm not sure I know the answer, but it's kind of scary, I guess is the right word, when we can look at what Iran is capable of doing um, with a decimated military. And I don't know how this is going to play out. I also hear stories that some of our weaponry is running low. And in this regard, one of the things that angers me to no end is when I see all of these articles that talk about the different problems that we allegedly have with our munitions. This is not something that should be put out there for our enemies to read. Yesterday, I don't know if it's a parody or is somebody being honest, or what the story is, but they had a caption on a video clip that said that, and here I go again with my short-term memory problem, and all I can say is I ask people to be patient here, but I think it's important that I show people, because I am 100% convinced that this is a result of my taking those injections that they gave us over the pandemic. And, I regret not copying this and keeping it, but I had read an article that was talking about a peer-reviewed medical study which showed that people who took the vaccines were having problems with their brain as they're aging. And, I've had all the tests. I've gone through everything. And what I do know on the positive side is I have neither Alzheimer's nor dementia, because both of those conditions require an increase in amyloids, and basically what happens is the amyloids congregate on stems and clog it all up, and that's what causes the memory problems for people with those conditions. So I'm fortunate enough to know that I don't have those conditions, but the doctors have not diagnosed me with any condition. And okay, so I get my care from the Veterans Administration, and these are government employees, and I think some of them are still afraid because of the what happened over the pandemic, and how they were barred from being honest and telling their people the truth. And so this is what I now have to deal with. And generally speaking, it doesn't affect my quality of life or anything. I'm still able to go places, do things. I know who everyone is. I haven't forgotten people or anything. Yeah, sometimes I forget the names. Let me say this. God blessed me with a super good memory in my younger days. And so I was able to remember, a lot of names of certainly anything or any person that was in the news for any amount of time. I would be able to recall all those names. So, I do have some problems sometimes recalling names, and I think that that's just a normal part of aging. But the short-term memory problem, it's so annoying, and but it is what it is. And I think it's important, for me at least, to keep talking about this and letting people know, because if the doctors who wrote this study are correct, uh, a vast majority of people who took these shots are going to have problems as they age, and these are problems with their brain. And if you look at the schedule, I'll say, of neurologists, they're being kept. Uh, their schedules are full, and they have very little free time, and there's generally a shortage of them out there, and this is a problem. I don't know how that problem is going to be fixed or anything. I'm just fortunate enough that if the VA can't get to me in a reasonable time, they're going to send me on the outside, and I'm convinced, that there really is a little more that the doctors can do, and they have provided me memantine, which is a drug that's given to Alzheimer's patients, and so I take it. Does it help or hurt? It's really hard to say. Sometimes I think it helps, sometimes I don't, but it is what it is, and this is, like I say, a result of something during the pandemic. And in the news, we are reading now, about Fauci and this guy's ego and everything. And the problem that I have is I don't know why he hasn't been charged yet. I don't care that he has a pardon. That has to be tested in the courts. And I think, especially in Fauci's case, because Biden has already admitted under oath that he was unaware of these pardons, that, this is definitely a slippery slope that it appears at this point that the Trump DOJ is going to allow. And I just have on so many levels problems with this, and it is what it is. And so at the LibertyDaily.com we have this headline today. It says Fauci toadies privately called lab leak theory, quote, highly likely, unquote, while publicly shutting it down. Look, these people knew what was going on. So what is the problem? Well, you see, the problem is they were doing gain of function research. And gain of function research is where they experiment with known pathogens. And the whole point of it is to make them more deadly. In other words, make them have the ability to kill more people. Now, gain of function research is allegedly illegal in the United States, and you would think by extension it's illegal for people in the United States government to fund this in overseas labs. And so, of course they have to say it didn't come from a lab, because they're the ones paying the lab to do this work, which is illegal. And I'm amazed at how passive the American public is, knowing what they now know about the pandemic, because the loons who did this, I don't think they're satisfied with the results. I think they're planning B and C, and they may be other pandemics, or it may be other things. But you have a group of wealthy individuals. They believe that the planet is overpopulated, and that if this isn't fixed in a fairly short period of time, that everyone is going to die. And so these people, they're convinced that they need that if they want them and their family to survive, they have to get rid of all of these excess people, and they're paying huge sums of money to do so. And it's a shame. I just, I just don't get it, but it is what it is. And people, I would have thought, especially when we consider how many people lost their life during the pandemic, that just the family members of these people would be outraged right now, knowing that people in their government were complicit in these deaths. And there's no pushback from the Republican Party. That is a big problem. It's been a big problem for years, decades actually, and it's why I have such a disdain for that party, because the loony leftists, they are who they are, and they make no qualms about it, right? And in fact, I saw a headline this morning where this clown, James Tallarico, he is alleging that the real violence is putting criminals behind bars. And, I've heard and read several polls that show that this guy's leading in Texas. Well, I don't buy that nonsense. This is the same, they're using the same playbook that they use with Beto O'Rourke, who we don't hear very much about him because the guy was an absolute loon. His policies were so far outside of where the average Texan sits or stands, that there was no chance that he was going to get elected. And the only way that this Tallarico can get elected is through fraud. And even though we consider Texas a red state, and generally speaking it is, there are problems now in Texas with some of these Muslim communities and the like. And usually what happens when these radicals take power, they find a way to, how shall we say, cheat, okay? That's what they do. They cheat in elections. And, I believe so many of the policies that we're having to suffer through right now are the result of stolen elections. This is a question I keep asking, and if anyone has an answer for this, I'd love to hear this answer, because I'm baffled by it, and that is, what was wrong with the old voting machines? I spent many an election day as a poll challenger years ago in my youth when I was very young, and I got to see how these machines worked, and there was it goes from very hard to nearly impossible to cheat with those machines. And so what the left did back in those days is they primarily were cheating on the absentee ballots. And because this was well known, I asked questions, like, how come this is tolerated? And I was told such things like, oh, well, it really doesn't affect the major elections, and, we're still able to prevail and such. And I could never quite understand this apathy that these people had, because cheating is wrong. And we see, they stole a presidential election. And I know that they like to call everyone crazy who makes that allegation. They also claimed early on that there was absolutely no evidence of any fraud. Well, that's a false statement. There's plenty of evidence of fraud. And I was optimistic when Trump won his third term, and perhaps, there's a slight chance that they are going to move forward and do something about this. But it's becoming clearer to me that the loons got away with it. And so once they get away with it, you know they're going to come up with something else because there's no pushback. And the Republicans are the party of no pushback. They hate to contest anything. They don't like it. And I think part of the reason is they're afraid of their own complicity in, how should we say, the illegal acts that are occurring. You know, I keep thinking back where we heard up there in Minneapolis where the feds confiscated a jet that had, I think it was $170 million in cash on it. Now, of course, since that happened, I haven't heard another word about this case. And perhaps what I'm going to have to do, it's been years since I've accessed some of the federal court records. And I'm curious to see if my old-time credentials will still work. Probably not. I'll probably have to get new ones. But I really am baffled by the lack of prosecutions by this DOJ. There are so many crimes that we know about. Now, how do we know about these crimes? Because Congress, the various congressional committees have had hearings where they've introduced documents into the evidence, and they've received testimony from the witnesses. And they put together neat packages that they then forward to the DOJ with a criminal referral for the crimes that they have the proof of. You know, so when this gets to the DOJ, there's very little work that really needs to be done in these cases. All that they have to do is charge the people. But that doesn't seem to happen. And of course, Fauci is one of these people who hasn't been charged. You know, Rand Paul has been on the top of this for a long time. And even he is astounded that nothing is going on. And he calls it out. But unfortunately, the biggest problem I have are, I call them the Republican pundits. These are the people that are out there in alternative media. Some of them here on YouTube, Rumble, and other such platforms. And they know about the problems when a Democrat is in office. But they ignore those, in some cases, those very same problems when a Republican is in office. And I'm sorry, that's not the right way to do it. They're hurting our country by doing this. They need to keep the Trump administration honest. You know, one of the first problems that I experienced with President Trump was 1 month when the BLS job numbers come out. You know, he's out there touting these numbers and talking about how, you know, his administration is booming and this is all evidence of it. And I cringed because I knew that these numbers would get revised downward, because that's just the way that the BLS does their, you know, I don't want to call handiwork, because it's all based on lies and the like. But these are things that, unfortunately, on the right, they just allow all this nonsense to go on, and they don't push back. You know, I was reading another article about this district judge who has been overturned several times by the Supreme Court, and he just basically ignores their decision. The rule of law is being destroyed in this country, and nobody's out there crying about that. Because once the rule of law breaks down, the whole country's going to collapse, because people have to have a legal recourse if they are wrong. And it's becoming increasingly hard for your typical common everyday American to utilize the court system. Everything is so corrupt today, and nobody seems willing or wanting to fix the things that are happening, and so they progressively get worse. You know, when they say, "Hey, we got away with this crime," well, let us move up another notch and see if we can get uh, pull this even more devious caper off. And this keeps happening, and there's little pushback. And that's the part that I really fail to grasp, is why nobody's getting charged. I feel sorry for President Trump, because he has no luck with the DOJ. And I go back to that jet that had all of those millions of dollars. The corruption is so voluminous that these people have huge sums of money to dangle in front of these various office holders. And how else can you explain Jeff Sessions and Pam Bondi? They were both law and order individuals. They both became Attorney General, and when they became Attorney General, it's like they closed their eyes to all of the crime that we see going on. And perhaps I'm using too broad a paintbrush right there. So, yeah, they're prosecuting little guys for a number of crimes, and rightfully so. I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but it's the political class that apparently is getting a pass. There's really, when you look at how many criminal furls that Congress has sent to the DOJ, and all of these people are able to get away with it. It's sad. It's like with all this fraud that's been uncovered in the last couple years, how many politicians are in jail? I don't get it. I feel, I just am absolutely flabbergasted by this. You know, I'm drawing a blank now for her name, but you had that mayor of Dalton, Illinois, and I mean, she was as corrupt as they come. And they even called in a previous mayor of Chicago to come in and do an investigation. And that investigation showed corruption at a very high level. But what happens, and this is interesting, what happens here, because this woman decides that she's going to move after being defeated in Illinois. She's going to, well, and again, there's some question whether she actually moved or not. I don't really know all of the facts, but I know she ran as a Republican. I mean, it seemed to me that she was shouting very loud from a public platform, "Catch me if you can," and they can't, because they let her go. And I just shake my head, because people are suffering because of the corruption of these individuals. The country is broke. I saw a headline the other day, and I don't remember who the congressperson was who was talking about this, but they were saying basically, if we can weed out all of the corruption, we could have a balanced budget. Now, if you extrapolate that out, and this is probably not factually correct, but nonetheless, all of this corruption is the reason, or is a good percentage of our debt, and the fact that our financial system is teetering on the verge of collapse. And nobody's going to like it if that happens. And I know there's a lot of people out there that think that they're going to do this, that, and or the other thing. And I just don't think anyone could tell how these things will unravel, because it's all so intricate, and there are so many, tentacles out there. And you have all of these things are all intertwined and intermingled, and when it actually is falling apart, nobody knows how it's going to play out. But think this is a problem. I think our country is really, really facing some terrible, terrible times ahead. I'm glad that I'm old and I've lived most of my life and I'm in the final chapters of my life. I really feel so sorry for the young people today. I understand their anger at the country that we're leaving them because they have so many financial problems, and I don't see an end. I don't know how this all plays out, but it's one of those things that we have to deal with it as best we can. And with that, I think I've ran enough for today, and I wish everyone has a great day. Stay safe, be careful. There's a lot of far too many loons out there. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.